Hi everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH1502 Introduction to Community Media, and this is just a short overview of the topics that we'll be covering in the 13th lecture, which is about media literacies. And last week we looked at some examples of media, which was really useful. I didn't get through them all. It'd be great if you go back over the notes. I kind of got distracted and sidetracked from kind of getting through them. But if you get the time to go back through the notes and look at some of the examples, that'll be really useful. But I think where we want to kind of move a step forward, if you like, is thinking about what the kind of approaches that people need to work effectively to use media, to understand media, to create media. And this is usually kind of tied up in what's called the literacies and skills debate and discussion. So we'll look at some issues and we'll use some terms which kind of open up this debate and discussion. So it's kind of an excuse me. It's kind of an idea which is very important because it allows us to rethink through what it is that's important about the way that we use and consume and produce our media. And so the first thing that we want to do is we want to contextualize the use of media, and it's the idea that we live in a world, a culture which is contested. So it's not fixed and certain. It's not something which is solid and everlasting. Actually, as people change, as generations change, as technology changes, as social relationships change, so do our expectations and our experiences of how we use media and the skills. You know, in the 1950s, it was important to be literate, and this is where the term comes from. And we used, books. Book literacy was kind of the standard model. 1960s saw the extension of television, regarded as a fairly disposable kind of entertainment medium, but not particularly long-lasting. But now we live in a world of multiple screens, interactive screens, mobile communication devices, and that's changed the nature of how we think about literacy. What kind of literacies, what kind of capabilities, what kind of skills, what kind of ideas, what kind of mindset do we need in order to be able to engage with the mediated world around us? So this is something which is kind of about thinking, our job, and as we gear up towards writing the academic report at the end of the module, about what do we mean by our thinking skills, critical literacies, what thinking skills, how do we need to be able to unpick certain types of ideas? How do we not take things at face value? How do we look at things in a way which says, is this right? Is this fit for purpose? Is this something that we ought to carry on working with, or do we need to change it? And if we do need to change it, in what way do we need to change it? So we're going to look at some kind of concept ideas based around thinking skills in this lecture. So we'll look at, you might have heard of Bloom's taxonomy, which kind of characterises the steps through knowledge towards a point of self-actualization and what's important within that taxonomy. And there's some changes and ideas that have been proposed that adapt that. So what's important to us about being able to bring ideas together and be able to look at things in a way which says we're not taking this at face value, but what we're doing is we can adapt and we can change, or we can reinforce why we do value it. At least we know why. We're not just doing it automatically, if you like. We're not just doing it as a response, but we're doing it because we understand why it's important. So the taxonomy idea is quite important because it gives us this kind of a framework, and we mentioned this last week about the idea of a framework for evaluating the media that we produce and consume. And who defines this framework? Well, we do. We define this framework. We're the ones, you particularly, are the ones who will be stepping forward to implement and use these frameworks in the future. So when you're making decisions, you've got an idea on what basis this framework is enabling you to securely and confidently make those decisions, and not just to do it because that's how it's been done for a long time in the past. So we look at different types of knowledge, what's important about different types of knowledge, kind of practical knowledge, factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, meta knowledge, if you like, philosophical maybe. And we'll look at some ideas about kind of different types of critical thinking skills. So usefully, this is important because one of the things about if we're working in community media, we're thinking about empowering people to speak and to produce media. And what the approach that we take for this has to regard people, not has to regard people, but does regard people as being creative agents in their own right. They're not just kind of, if you like, dupes or cattle or the masses, the audience, the listener. It's not just people, the community. It's not just people who are regarded en masse, but we regard people as individuals, and individuals have the power and the facility and the entitlement to change things and to play a part in society, in our communities, and make a contribution which is valued. So we can think about the different types of learning models, and we'll look at Paulo Freire is a South American, I think he was Portuguese, Brazilian or Argentinian. Can't remember where he was from. I'll find out. But he very much challenged some of the standard learning models that were used in South American countries in the 1960s and 70s. And he was very opposed to the kind of autocratic style of education, which basically saw people as empty vessels that the teacher would fill with their knowledge and their wisdom. And while that might be a long-lasting kind of way of thinking about learning, it's not the most appropriate. So what are the alternative ways that we can think about learning? So there's problem posing, there's critical thinking, there's kind of a kind of pushback against that kind of autocratic form of learning. And we need to put this in the context of the present day. We need to put it in the context of how we adapt and change to online cultures and online media. So what kind of, Howard Rheingold famously talks about net smarts and we need, what's the know-how and the know-why, he says, in terms of thinking how we can use the internet. So what we know and we talked last week about the idea of participation. What's the best learning model to encourage participation and to encourage people to genuinely and effectively participate, especially in an environment where there's kind of a good deal of information which kind of overwhelms us at times. So we'll look at this in the context of where some media is heading. So kind of the idea that we've gone past the broadcast model of media, and we've entered a spreadable era of media, and kind of how do we think about the learning skills and the literacies that we need in a kind of more future focused way, which takes into account the new network-enabled digital mobile practices. And finally, what we'll do is we'll look at, there's a guy, Doug Belshaw, who produced a kind of periodic table of learning skills for digital media, digital literacies, and that we'll go through that. It's quite informative. It'd be interesting to see where you value yourself on this table, which kind of skills you think are most relevant, most important, and if you're working with other people, what do you think they might find important? So, a lot to go through. I'll try and get through it this time without being distracted. Nearly 9 minutes for this, so I'll let you go. See you at the lecture. The notes are up on the DMU Commons wiki. Just go to wiki.our.dmu.ac.uk. If you want a conversation about this, go to talk.our.dmu.ac.uk. See you soon.